Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, reviewing an Ameribrade 2x72-inch belt grinder. So today I'll be reviewing an Ameribrade 2x72-inch belt grinder. Now the primary market here is knife makers, but metal fab guys, auto body people, even woodworkers might find plenty of use for this kind of machine. I should mention that I did an unboxing a few months ago, and this will cover some of the same territory, but haven't had a chance to use the machine every day for about 3 months. I've had a chance to really get to know the ins and outs of its performance, so I'm ready to give a full-blown review. Okay, let's start by talking about exactly what I'm reviewing. This is an Ameribrade brand 2x72-inch belt grinder circa 2021, variable speed with a 1.5 horse motor. Now the grinder has a bunch of attachments which I'll get into as I go on. Here's the controller, or VFD, which allows you to go forward and reverse and to go from any speed between 0 and 1750 revolutions per minute. I'm also using the optional stand. For those of you just getting into knife making, the 2x72-inch belt grinder is really the de facto standard in custom knife making. It's kind of the sweet spot for size, cost, and footprint on the one hand, and then power and efficiency on the other. Full disclosure, Ameribrade provided this to me to use, so I didn't have to come out of my pocket for it. Take that however you will. So how much would this have cost if I bought it myself? I'll get to that in a minute. Not hiding the weenie here. Ameribrade has a lot of options, and I want you to understand what they are before you think too much about the money part of it. Ameribrade grinders are made in the US. The basic setup is this. You have a chassis here with 2 shoes which allow you to mount various attachments, including grinding attachments and a grinding table. More on that in a minute. Motor back here. Mounts on a stand made specially for the grinder, though you can also mount it on a bench or your own stand. Let's talk first about the overall functionality, design, and ease of use. You slide an attachment arm with some sort of grinding surface on it into here. The handle has a catch, making it easy to insert a new belt. Take out the slack by sliding the attachment arm until the belt is tightish. Then you release that little catch and you're ready to roll. If you forget to release the catch, here's what happens. Tracking here adjusts the belt movement side to side. When you change attachments, the belt always changes track a little, so I just start the grinder from 0 by flipping on this switch, then inch it up a little, getting the tracking perfect, then speed it up to whatever speed I want to use. If you want to use a work table, that goes into this second little channel and tightens pretty much the same way as the attachment arms. The table's adjustable, so you can set it to any angle you want. It's got a little adjustable stop so that you can kind of micro adjust it perfectly square, and that'll be fairly repeatable once it's set. That's really important when you're using a jig or grinding really square faces on something. So if you're enjoying this review or the hundreds of knife making how-tos, gear builds, or other knife related videos I've done here over the past decade or so, I hope you'll consider supporting the channel on Patreon. Help this channel continue to offer high quality knife related videos, and you'll have access to tons of knife and gear related plans, but you'll also have the quiet satisfaction of standing behind the stuff you care about. Thanks, and let's get back to it. The grinder also pivots like so, which is handy for reasons I'll get into later. One of the neatest functions of this stand is that you can slide all the attachments through the center and store them. If you have a grinder with a bunch of attachments, you'll know that storing attachment arms can be a bit of a pain in the neck. I actually had to spend a day or two fabbing a storage gizmo for the arms on my baiter, so this is very handy. All in all, a well-designed, well-thought-out grinder. So much for theory. How does it all come together in practice? Let's start by talking about overall build quality. One of the most important qualities in a reasonably high-end grinder is rigidity. If things shake around or vibrate, it compromises your ability to grind well, and it indicates overall that corners may have been cut to save weight and cost. No problem on that score. I was concerned that a stand like this, single piece of tubing, casters on the bottom and so forth, might be a little shakier than a bench mount, but it's really not. Everything's rock solid here. Fit and finish is good. Unlike some lower end grinders, all the structural parts are made from steel. What about the motor? It's a WEG, American made, though the company is Brazilian if you care about those things. It's nice and quiet, a good deal quieter than the Leeson motor on my old Bader, in fact. Will it last for 20 years of hard use like the Leeson? That I can't tell you, but so far so good. In addition to the 110 volt horse and a half, they also offer a 220 volt 3 horse model. The VFD, that's the speed control, not only can you turn it off and on and run the motor at any speed, but this model also runs backwards. Let's talk power. Like I said, I chose a 1.5 horsepower 110 volt motor. You can run it on a standard 20 amp 110 volt circuit without blowing breakers. But before we talk power, a word about belt speed. The bigger the drive wheel, that's this right here, the faster the belt goes, given the same RPM. This model has a fairly large 7-inch drive wheel. It means you can really make this belt fly, almost 1,000 feet per minute faster than my Bader, which is great as far as it goes. The downside of having a relatively large drive wheel is that when you get on the wrong side of the torque curve, you can bog down a grinder. I find that this machine is happier running at about 80% and tends to stall if you press really hard on it when it's at full tilt. I've heard through the grapevine that the issue here is not the motor per se, but that this particular VFD is designed to cut off when it hits a certain load threshold. I don't know if that's the case, but whatever, it's not a good thing for knife making. Bigger motor, this probably won't happen, but for me it means that doing my normal amount of pressure, I probably won't run this machine at full speed all the time. That said, in practice, I'm getting about the same amount of grinding out of it as with my Bader, so take that for whatever it's worth. The package Ameribrade sent me included a flat platen with a small wheel and then a rubber-faced secondary wheel that can be used as a contact wheel if you want. Nifty little twofer kind of design. Also a 14-inch contact wheel, a small wheel attachment with replaceable contact wheels from 1/4 inch to a couple of inches, a rotary platen, and a surface grinder. I won't go too deep into how these all work, but here's the short version. Basically, the flat platen is your most basic attachment for grinding flat bevels and generally hogging away material. When I ran this at any sporty rate of speed, say 75% or above, the bearings in the small wheel here got pretty hot. Now, most manufacturers recommend that you don't run small wheels at full speed, so that's kind of par for the course. That said, when I bought my Bader 20 years ago, they said not to run them at full speed. But after a certain point, I just started running them at full speed anyway, and after 20 years, those bearings are still fine. I'm not necessarily saying that's a design flaw, but the harder you can drive your belt grinder, the happier you're going to be. You can pivot the whole thing and use the contact wheel and take the platen and small wheel totally out of the loop. At that point, you can definitely run as fast as you want. The 14-inch wheel worked flawlessly. If you want to do a lot of hollow grinding, this is the attachment for you. Pro tip, if you're considering buying a contact wheel like this, my recommendation is to get the biggest one you can fit on your machine. Rotary platen. Rotary platens basically do the same job as a flat platen, but they have a belt that goes around it, and that rubber belt softens up the face of the platen. Some people like these, I don't like them so much. So maybe I'm missing something, but I wasn't super enthusiastic about it after running it through its paces. I suspect that doesn't have anything to do with this particular one, but it's just a general feature of rotary platens. Anyway, the point of rotary platens is to kind of soften up a flat platen so that you get rid of what's known as belt bump, this little annoying thump, 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 thump that happens as the joint passes over your flat platen. This is not a big problem for heavy grit belts, but particularly when using thinner, higher grit belts, it really starts to cause problems. And this is intended as a fix for that. And I will say it's very successful at that, but I find that it's a little harder to grind crisp lines with the rotary than with a conventional platen. They also get hot if you run them fast, though Eric at Ameribrade has a chiller in the works that may be available by now. One of the coolest attachments is this small wheel attachment. You get a single arm and then this little rack of various diameter wheels that you can insert here. Some companies sell you a whole arm for each small wheel. This is expensive and eats up a lot of real estate around your grinder. This setup crushes that onesie-twosie type approach. Very nice design. One of the most important tricks in grinding knives is using the various diameter wheels that you have available to grind out things like finger notches, choils, Spanish notches, interior radii for bird's beak handles, and things like that, where you use the radius of the wheel to transfer a really clean, visually appealing, and ergonomic curve to the knife. The problem is, all those different things beg for different diameter wheels. Well, now you got them, all in one package. Slip one out of the fork, slip another in, and you're in business. Only takes a few seconds. I've used this attachment a ton during the past few months. In the future, if Ameribrade were to make a few of the larger wheels with rubber contact surfaces instead of making them from solid steel, that would be awesome. Still, a super smart, useful, versatile attachment. If there's a gripe here, it's that on the smallest couple of wheels, you can't grind side to side without bumping into the bearing shoe. That means they can't be used to make fullers. Depending on how deep you're trying to make the fuller and so forth, you're probably going to need a wheel up in the 1-inch range. Final attachment, a surface grinder. A surface grinder is just a gizmo for making things very flat and very parallel. There are large industrial surface grinders like this that will get things insanely flat, to 0.010 of an inch or better. That's not what this is for. This is for knife makers, flattening a billet, truing up a forged knife, taking scale off a heat-treated knife or stock from the mill, that sort of thing. And it works great for all those jobs. By the way, this is where that tilt mechanism that I mentioned earlier comes in handy. The surface grinder is much easier to use running sideways. This surface grinder is well designed and easy to use with tight, smooth bearings, magnets that were strong enough to hold anything I put on it anyway, and an included gauge so that you can measure how much material it's taken off. This attachment is not cheap. It runs about as much as their least expensive grinder, but absolutely worth it if you have the budget, especially if you make a lot of Damascus. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, so what's it all add up to? In my view, the real question with any purchase is value. Are you getting bang for your buck? There are grinders out there that I view as dip your toe in the water items. Buy them cheap, see if you like the hobby of knife making. If you do, you dump the El Cheapo model and pick up a real workhorse. This is a workhorse, a pro grinder. Back when I got started making knives 2 decades ago, I saved up until I could buy a pro-level grinder right out of the gate, and I haven't been sorry for one single second. The difference between a pro-level 2x72 and a light-duty 1x42, or even a low-end 2x72, night and day. While I've mentioned a few quibbles, you're going to have quibbles with anything. Bottom line, this is a grinder that does pretty much anything that you'd want a grinder to do, that's exceptionally well designed, incredibly versatile, and well built. You can get started with their most basic single speed grinder for $1,170 at the time of this review, with fancier packages with variable speed, the stand, a bunch of attachments running up into the 2.5, 3, maybe even a little more range. That may sound like a lot to some of you, but for a pro-level American-made grinder, it's a huge value in my book, with some of the traditional names in belt grinders running substantially more for similar levels of performance. All in all, home run. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.